Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for joining this webinar today. So, Kate, can you change the slides, please? Fantastic. Just introducing today's speaker. I'll be speaking first. I'm Domenica Di Lieto, the CEO of Emerging Communications, and I'll be joined by Kate Lee, who is our planning manager within our consultancy division and one of our property specialists, who will take on the webinar after myself, and then moving on to Rocky, who is our head of planning and R&D. Next slide, please. Just to give you a little bit of background as to who we are, for those that don't know us, Emerging Communications is a full service agency and consultancy practice, both based in Shanghai and London. Next slide, please. And we have three divisions of the company, essentially, all of which are involved in the property market. The first one is EC², which is our consultancy division, which is where Rocky and Kate are based in our London office. And our consultancy division does an awful lot of projects for property developers and property companies who are looking for either a customer-centric solution by way of a roadmap, or they're trying to identify how they're positioned in the market, or a comm strategy or basic market research. That division is involved at the start of any new project, but with a lot of our clients, they might come to us for a purely consultancy-led solution. We also have the agency solution, Emerging Communications, which is responsible for planning, deploying across all channels, programmatic, search, and so on and so forth, including web design services. And then EC Labs, of which today is a good example of that. So vlogs, masterclasses, sector workshops, webinars, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. Our approach, and this is very much going to be the sentiment for today, at Emerging Communications, we firmly believe and have proven that it is absolutely imperative that before we start on a project with any property developer or property company, that we analyse the context of which you as a business reside. So by that we mean we will analyse your competitors. We will look at your customer segments that you're trying to target, both here and in China. We'll talk about that at depth later. And we'll analyse, more importantly, where you sit within the market, what your differentiators are and what your USPs are. Then, and only then, we will create a strat plan with clear KPIs that are very realistic in terms of creating a roadmap of targeting individual customer segments, Chinese segments, on different channels, with the right context at the right time. So execution very much leads from a strategic plan. If we do it like that, and we do it like that at Emerging Communications, we get phenomenal results. And it's really, really important to recognise we're in a very, very competitive market. And that if we can differentiate you as a property or you as a property company, and we know who we're targeting with what message, that's when we can get phenomenal results. At the end of this webinar, I will be going through some COVID packages that we've created specifically for everybody on this call, which at this challenging time will enable you to motor very, very quickly and capitalise on the Chinese market when we are finding increased numbers of Chinese affluent property owners and also developers and those that are investing in property who are actually looking and inquiring now. Next slide, please. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? The first thing I'm going to talk about is what is the opportunity now, as in today, and what has led to that point and how you can capitalize on that opportunity. I will then move on to Kate, who is going to talk at length about the Chinese buying community, the segments and their behavior and their triggers. By knowing this is absolutely imperative, that by knowing what the triggers are, you can obviously make sure the marketing is aligned with that to get the best possible result. And we'll move on to Rocky, who will talk about how we can capitalize on these Chinese buyer communities and the best way to do that with the best possible return. Moving back to me while I talk about how we can actually deliver on that promise. Next slide, please. So what's led us to today? For most of you on this call, you will have seen this already, but just to reiterate, since November 2019, there have been some fundamental shifts which have fueled the Chinese property market. The first one was an announcement in the budget that stamp duty for international and overseas buyers was not going to happen until April 21. This is a phenomenal opportunity. It means that buyers are looking to buy in 2020 and they're not looking to leave it, because if they do, that's going to cost them substantially more. If you're spending a couple of £1 million plus on a property, stamp duty is going to make a massive difference. So we are now seeing a surge of buyers coming from China, both here and in China mainland. There's also, it doesn't go, everybody has seen that our UK interest rate is down to an all-time low. This is making borrowing, for those that are borrowing, who are buying multiple properties, some are buying outright, some are using mortgages, and parents are paying for down payments. We'll talk about that later. That's a phenomenal opportunity as well, as is the fact that the pound is at an all-time low. The pound being at an all-time low is actually fueling UK universities to target more Chinese students, and we are seeing a surge of applications and a surge of students accepting offers for 2020 applications in September and 2021 in January. Even if we're still in lock-in, and for goodness sake, I hope not in September, universities are now set up to start the first term entirely online. So this is not stopping Chinese students in coming to the UK to start an undergraduate or postgraduate education. Next slide, please. Just some anecdotes of some of the people we've spoken to that have also seen a shift and a rise in applications and in customers. So Harrods Estate, 2.5% in 2016 to 20% in 2019. Knight Frank has also seen it, Hamptons. All the property agents that we deal with at Emerging Communications have seen an increase in both sales inquiries in the last 3 months, but an increase in those inquiries actually turning to sales. So now is an opportunity, and it has to be capitalised, and soon. Next slide, please. One of the biggest shifts that we've seen at Emerging Communications is during China lockdown, which of course has now been lifted in the last couple of weeks. We saw an increase, significant increase in online traffic to property sales via portal sites such as Huawei and many others within China, and just generally buyers relying on online technology such as live streaming, such as sales agents actually going around a property that somebody's interested with, showing them on WeChat video. So actually taking the experience of sales online from offline. Because if a buyer can't actually go to your sales suite, either in China or the UK, this is the next best thing. And because buyers want to capitalize on the return now and want to capitalize on those things I mentioned, this is becoming an imperative part of the marketing and sales cycle, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. Next slide, please. I'm now going to move on to Kate. Hi, Kate.
Hello.
Okay, I'll leave for now, and I'll join you later on. Thanks, everybody.
So I will be talking about the drivers of the pulling factors of Chinese buyers investing in the UK property market in this session. The first to start with an overview of the high net worth and also ultra high net worth numbers of households in China. So the number is actually growing, continue to grow, of these Chinese high net worth and ultra high net worth families. So according to a Hurun report, is an institution specialized in studying Chinese high net worth individuals and their lifestyle. Currently, there are more than 1.5 million high net worth households with £1 million investable assets, and more than 10,000 that has £10 million total assets that's classified as ultra high net worth households. And among those ultra high net worth households, so 69 cases already have been active in investing globally. So regardless the occupations of the Chinese high net worth, property investment is the key way for them to generate and accumulate their wealth. And more of these affluent Chinese, they are looking to allocate their assets in the international market in order to balance their wealth portfolio. And in general, offshore investment makes up 12.5% of their total wealth. So property is the #1 investment decision for Chinese high net worth family. However, Chinese government have implemented very strict property purchase limitation in recent years. So here is an example of list of the key cities in China, like Beijing, Shanghai, or Shenzhen. They all have the limitation of ownership of not more than 2 or 3 properties. So as a result, Chinese high net worth individuals, they are now extending the context of property investment into global. So for that, London is one of the most appealing overseas investment destination because a mix of drivers. So investing in London is exceptional choice of wealth preservation, elite education, and also for lifestyle. This is long-term trend which will not be impacted by the COVID-19 outbreak. So most of the Chinese families, affluent Chinese families, they already have extensive domestic investment portfolio. So overseas investments helps them to diversify the risk and also getting better returns. So London is a key global target for Chinese buyers who are increasingly taking a long-term view to invest based on the very strong fundamental and secure and steady UK economy and also the political environment. The world-class educational institution and also a very strong residential demand of all time as a global top city. These buyers, they're less sensitive of the short-term economic and political uncertainty. So it's actually seen as the opportunity to getting stronger growth potential. So not just for London, now there are growing interest for the North England, such as Birmingham, Manchester, and also Liverpool, still are growing these kind of interest from Chinese affluent family. So UK education has its global appeal. Affluent families, they are sending their kids to receive the best education in the UK. Is a key process of training up their kids' ability to hold on to the family wealth and also to create their own fortune. Here, I'm showing you that the British institutions already opened their campuses in China. Some of the very famous British schools like Dulwich College and Wellington College, they also have their campuses in multiple cities in China. So these schools, they are teaching British syllabus, connecting to the higher education progression in the UK. It's an option for the affluent Chinese parents to start planning elite education for their kids without having to send them away too soon. So we're also seeing that the trend starting education in the UK earlier. So in the last 5 years, the number of Chinese students at high school in the UK has increased to 89.5%. So alongside of education planning, UK home settling is also in these affluent families' overall plan to provide a safe and comfortable environment for their kids while they're living in the UK. So buying a home in London is essential to settling their kids while studying and continue to work here after graduation. The same goes to Manchester and Birmingham. Also allow the family to visit them and stay with the kids in their own home. This is becoming very normal for these affluent families' lifestyle choice. That's the end of the second session. We'll be over to Rocky now for the third session.
Hi, before I open the third section, just want to let you know that if you have any question come along during our presentation, please use the chat box. We'll be able to answer your questions in the Q&A section. Thanks. So in this section, we are taking a closer look of UK-based Chinese buyers in their decision-making journey. Next slide, please. Chinese millennials own their own home in younger age than average of any other country. We're talking about an average age below 30 when the first property purchase happens. So that means nearly 5 years earlier than Londoners. You can see it from the chart here. And when it comes to the overseas property buying, such trend continues and resulted in even younger buyers. It's very normal practice to have parents to take care of the down payment for them, and they either take the whole, in terms of overseas purchase, the kids either take the whole property as a gift from their parents, or they find a way to handling the mortgage themselves. Next slide, please. So for Chinese young professionals and students who are currently living or settling down in the UK, the purchase journey of their first UK property extended as the decision is made together with parents in China. So for first-time buyers, as you can see in this sort of co-decision-making wheel, there's nothing more important than brand credibility, because no matter how well established your brand is among UK market, the reputation doesn't translate automatically to Chinese buyers. So the credibility of your brand needs to be built upon your marketing activities and PR exposure designed for Chinese market, for Chinese potential buyers. The positive buzz you create would be spread to not only potential buyers, but also those UK-based Chinese who are constantly influencing their friends and connections as the go-to advisors. Next slide, please. So in recent 5 years, we've seen first-time buyers evolving into second steppers as they are looking for another or multiple properties in the UK for either home upgrading or buy-to-let purpose. These experienced buyers have gained knowledge and focusing more on long-term value of investment and potential on return. And also it's worth mentioning that UK-based experienced Chinese buyers, they are actually sharing insights and their investment choices quite actively within their network of UK-based homeowners, which means that once you build a relationship with these second steppers, it's a long tail chain of potential new deals you can close. Moving to the next slide. So I would like to share with you a real case of how UK-based Chinese buyers making decisions and how the circle of influence works. So Sophie, she is currently studying in the UK, been studying in London for 6 years. She was grown up in Beijing and attended international schools. It's a very long-term, early planning of her family to kind of like to raise her upon a global, to become a global citizen with an elite lifestyle and education in the UK. So her mom is actually a very experienced, global property investors. So she's currently the owner. Sophie is currently the owner of 2 apartments in London now. Her mom bought the first 1-bed apartment on the first year she started her education in London. And then so she settled down in here, and a couple of years later, a 2-bed apartment was purchased in the same development, literally in the same building. So she's currently moving into the 2-bed apartment, and the 1-bed apartment is on let now. So that's her family, how they plan it and proceed it in here. Next slide, please. So actually, Sophie is a very close family friend of mine. I've been, well, Rocky, AKA myself, I'm a Tier 2 working visa holder. I've been settled in London for 5 years. last year I bought a 2-bed apartment in East London to live in. And for me and my family, the decision making, during our decision making, Sophie and her family, her mom as experienced investors, we wouldn't make any decision before the final stamp put on our biggest influencer, which is Sophie and her mom, because we know that they are the ones we can trust. They are the advisor of our choices in here. So in my decision-making journey, my mom attended a sales event in Beijing, and then the next day when I woke up, I then kind of like made my journey to the sales, to the marketing suite, and then so the decision-making was really made by me and my parents, both in China and in here. So moving on to the next slide. So I want to share with you a very interesting case happened just last month. So Peter and one of my friends who's holding the investment visa and settled in Sheffield with his family, we were having a kind of like, he called me to check if I'm doing okay in London last month, and then we were sharing our updates. I told him that I purchased a London apartment last year. He actually not only owns a house in Sheffield to live in himself, but also he's a very experienced, property investors in North England, mainly Manchester and Sheffield, for buy-to-let apartments. When I shared my kind of like recent purchase, he was like, "Oh, London, never really thought about London." And then we spent, more than 1 hour on phone sharing the brochure and the information of my apartment. And 2 hours later, he called me like, "Rock, he bridged me to the sales agent that you used. I want to make the decision now." And me and my wife, we've agreed that we would like to purchase a 2-bed apartment in the exact same building as you. I was shocked because that's during the lockdown. He wouldn't. I said, like, you're not even coming to see it. Like, you're not coming to visit the marketing suite and the surrounding neighborhood. He said, that you've made the decision, you've done the research. I trust you. So it's just for him, like he's been taking really his time in the furlough situation now. So he's now looking to a second property investment in London. So for him, it's really balancing his property investment portfolio across the UK. Next slide, please. It's not just the UK-based Chinese I'm influencing in decision making. I think last December, one of my friends, who's a couple of years older than me, she studied in London 10 years ago, and then returned to Beijing and got married, started her family, and living and working in Beijing at the moment. When I shared the kind of like my experience to her, and she immediately thought, like, because she recently, started to planning her kids, who's only 3-year-old at the moment. Like, she really kind of like cherished her days in London, and she felt like, as early as they can start her daughter's education in the UK, it would be, so they are thinking about property choices, even she's only 3-year-old, and then she made a really quick decision after consulting me, and it's sort of like I was the one who's putting the final stamp on for her, as I've been here for many years. So she purchased a 2-bed apartment buy-to-let as part of the elite education plan for her kids in the future. So that's a real case of myself and people influenced by myself in the decision-making journey. So in this, just want a summary here for this section. It's all about understanding the power of UK-based Chinese in terms of how financially ready they could be, especially when they're holding tier 1 investment or entrepreneur visa. And we are talking about more than 11,000 of them from China now at the moment. And also as well as how important is each one of homeowners' opinions to their personal connections. So they are your golden customers. Once purchased, they become key opinion consumers. That's my section, and thank you.
Many thanks, Rocky. Next slide, please. Many property developers that we've spoken to and we have witnessed have these challenges. The most important challenge for a lot of property developers and property companies is to be reliant on agents in market. Agents such as JLL, Savills are very, very, very important, but it's also critical that as a business and as a brand, you have your own awareness and you can focus very much on your differentiation and your USPs. And you build a reputation and credibility of your development with your audiences. That is absolutely critical because it's very, very noisy out there and agents are representing an awful lot of properties. And we see all too often where we have translated material that might be 2 or 3 years old and is actually not even relevant to the particular phase that you are actually promoting or marketing. So it's absolutely critical that you think about the awareness of your brand as the #1 priority. The other thing is there is quite often very much ambiguity, I can't say the word today, around messaging to Chinese audiences with no real segmentation of your audiences. So for example, what one might say to an investor audience versus somebody who's coming over here to be domiciled because they're looking as part of a lifestyle solution, as part of an education for their children, is going to be different messaging. So it's really important to have a very clear path as to what you're saying to what audiences, on what channels and in what context. And we just see so few property developers actually doing this. They're translating what they're putting on Instagram, what they're putting on Facebook, and it doesn't really resonate with what they're trying to say to Chinese audiences. And the third most important challenge, which can easily be overcome, is a real silo between the departments in China, quite often sales departments or sales agents, working completely independently to the marketing departments at HQ over here. So either the brand messaging is not getting across, or more importantly, the sales departments whose job really should be sales, should be conversion of leads, not actually getting the leads driven from the marketing department in the UK. It's really important to integrate those teams together and to follow one strategic roadmap so you're all on the same page. Next slide, please. So talking about the funnel and how to get your voice out there. So let's talk now about how we're actually going to deliver on the promise of your brand and your property. The first and most important thing, if you can just, I know this is on animations, Kate, if you can just do next slide, please. Thank you. The first and most important thing to do is to build, again, I'm going to reiterate, to build the brand visibility of what your property has to offer, and to build the credibility to make sure that your audiences know that you are what you stand for and that they can trust in your promise, and be very clear what that is and be very clear that that's being demonstrated. And one of the ways to do that is to endorse your brand with media endorsement. We call this online PR. You may use key opinion leaders, you may use media, you may use earned media, but it's all really media endorsement. It's what a lot of you may know as online advertorials, but essentially you are going to piggyback or leverage media or KOL or endorsers who already have audiences that are trusted. That will help to build the brand credibility of you as a brand with your potential buyers, both in the UK and in China. You can then go on and reinforce that credibility through an open dialogue with various audiences, with relevant messaging and communication, and then have an ongoing dialogue through a channel like WeChat. So just be aware that when you're building brand visibility and you are building the brand of your property, that is what I call mass brand visibility. And then we're going to be moving down the funnel to a one-on-one conversation with your sales team. And that sales funnel has got to be seamless. So the sales and marketing departments must work together to that end. Next slide, please. It's really important to follow this basic rule. Once you've identified who your target segment is, let's just take an example. It could be a second buyer. They've already bought from you or a competitor. They're buying multiple properties in London or multiple properties in the UK. You know what their hooks are. You know what their motivations are. That particular segment, you need to create the right content for them, whether that be written content, dynamic content like video, banners, and you need to make sure that you have the right messaging, so the right hook that will resonate with that audience, and that you actually use the right channel, so where they hang out at the right time, and then that you have the right trigger to the sales funnel. So by that way, I mean that they're actually being led somewhere. Are they being led to a salesperson on WeChat? Are they being led to a landing page? What are they actually going to do with that messaging? And you need to make sure that all of it is tracked through the funnel. And this sounds like really basic marketing, but we see too often property developers will spend a fortune on Baidu in China, or they might have a programmatic campaign, and it actually doesn't lead anywhere. So you can't track the sale and the linkage is broken, and it then is not put into your CRM. So it's really, really important that you see this as a funnel in the same way you would any other marketing for any other part of the world, US, Europe. But make sure it's relevant. If it's not relevant, it is not going to resonate, and you're going to end up with spending a lot of marketing money without very much return. Next slide, please. So in a world of utopia, essentially we lay it out like this. You have to have a plan. It doesn't take months to write a plan, but a clear plan is absolutely essential. Who you are targeting, with what, and what messaging over what channels, and what are the reasonable KPIs that can be set for conversion of those channels. And working with the specialist on KPIs is really, really important, that you set KPIs that are realistic with those particular segments with that marketing spend. And secondly, you integrate your efforts across all of your teams. And this is something I can't reiterate enough, and I'm going to actually be interviewing Kate on a vlog later on this week, and I'll publish that next week and send you a link talking specifically about this, insisting that basically property brands just think about how their sales teams and their marketing, their digital and their agents all work together for the same aim. And again, if you've got a clear plan, that's very easy to do. And if you don't, you're all going to be going off at different tangents, and it's going to water down your marketing spend. Tactically, it's really important that the marketing teams in the UK lead the branding activity that then gets localized for the Chinese audience, not the other way around. And so that everything is consistent and recognizable, which helps to build credibility. And that you bring your development or your company or your brand offering alive online. Leverage the technology that's available, live streaming, virtual tours, online events. Don't wait until such a time as you can go back in market in China, run an event, because you will have missed the opportunity of the next quarter of buyers that are desperate to secure properties now while the pound is low and while interest rates are low. And throughout, drive credibility through online PR, as I mentioned, and absolutely critical that you leverage and piggyback on already established endorsers in the market. And let's not forget KOCs, which is key opinion consumers. Rocky talked at length about how she had spoken to friends and her network and given advice on what to buy. This is so important. And we spoke to a property developer yesterday that also reiterated this is how it works. And this is how it works. Friends will ask, where have you bought? Why have you bought there? Oh, well, I need to make a decision quickly. Brilliant. I think I'll go to the same development. So if you're not nurturing that pool of very important KOCs, you're missing a trick. Same goes for, do you know who your top 10% of Chinese customers are? Are they being spoken to separately? Have they got their own communication? Because they are your low-hanging fruit. They will buy more properties. So having a one-on-one conversation and not via email, that's not the way to do it. It'd be better to have a separate WeChat group or to be talking to them individually and making sure you're keeping up a dialogue. That's a missed opportunity if you're not doing that. And lastly, don't forget domiciled Chinese students here. They are not only KOCs, they are buyers in their own right, and they're also talking to their parents about buying properties, or their aunts and uncles. They're effectively a very, very, very important segment that you should be targeting now more than ever in 2020. Next slide, please. Okay, so moving on to designing your China marketing roadmap. When we talk to property brands, one of the biggest issues that they face is one of two things. One, they might be new to the marketing of Chinese consumers. They haven't done that before. They've moved into a new role. And to that end, we will be running webinars which will cover off all digital channels in China, the landscape and consumer behavior. So we're running a series of 3. Myself and Melody will be putting those together in the next 10 days, and we will email you the links to those. It's really important to understand how the landscape differs in order to better understand how to put together a roadmap. But very simply, next slide, please. Thank you. If you think about it in 3 very, very, very simple steps, you will be in a very good place. The first one is, and I keep reiterating, understand who your consumers are. Every property development and property company on this call has a very different set of USPs and differentiators. You need to know what they are objectively, not as a board that has come up with a list of why you think you're better than your competitors, from actual evidence from why customers have bought from you and why they haven't, so that you know what you're saying to which customer segment, and then identify your segments so that you can create the right marketing that has the right hooks that will resonate with those buyers and is written in the right context on the right channels. It's all about relevance. China is a humongous opportunity, but if you were to not segment your audience both in China and the UK, you would not have enough money to target those people. So it's very important that segmentation and context of what you're doing and the right hooks is the #1 priority. Number 2 is not to underestimate, and I say this again, the power of your KOCs, your key opinion customers. Do you know who they are? Do you communicate with them? Do you have separate marketing for them? Do you run events for them? So when we're out of lock-in in the UK, and also for your sales teams in China, have you ever engaged with them? We have had the best results for our property companies by actually engaging with KOCs in both off and online events, in live streaming, in webinars, and also in on and offline events. So make sure you're talking to them, because they will be your advocates. They are effectively an unpaid sales team for you. And thirdly, when you drive your marketing activation, you need to ensure that you are moving from push to pull. So you're not doing tactical outreach by just, for example, throwing a lot of money at Baidu, a lot of money on social, without having a very clear plan around content and around segmentation and around hooks and triggers, which we've talked about a lot today. I'll do a separate session on that if anybody's interested. And that way you are going to be converting your buyers throughout the funnel with a very, very clear sales journey. And all too often we see with our brands that just a break in that journey is the reason they're not converting sales. It could be something as simple as the marketing's working or saying the right thing to the right people at the right time, but then they can't get through to your website, or they can't get through to the sales team on WeChat. So also really is important and critical to think about that sales journey. Next slide, please. One of the things that you can do, I know that we have over 28 property brands on this call. We are going to be running a Q&A session in a second. We've had quite a few questions coming through, which we will do our best to answer. But please feel free to do a one-on-one consultation. You can choose if you want to speak to Rocky, Kate, or myself, and we will have a chat with you for an hour to establish kind of where you're at, to give you some pointers as to the best course of action. Next slide, please. For those, and I've spoken to a couple of brands who are on this call who are quite desperate to get going and really don't know where to start, one of the things that we can do, that we're doing 2 separate sort of COVID, for want of a better term, offers for property developers to get going sooner rather than later. One of the things that the consultancy team can do is to do a very quick and accessible China roadmap so that you can move quickly. What they will do is audit what you currently have across your channels, look at your competitors and your customers to identify who your segments are, what your points of difference are, and evaluate your content and where improvements need to be made, and look at your marketing funnel. They can then plan a journey, a roadmap, where they will position you with the right differentiation and USPs to your target segments, the right channels at the right time. And then we have two types of brands. We have brands that are quite happy to then tactically deploy that in-house in China, or brands that wish for us to do so. So we can either train your teams to deploy that plan and then we go away, or we can actually tactically deliver it for you. If anybody on this call is interested in having a roadmap, then please book a one-on-one consultation, because we would need to do that in order to give you the right course of action. For those that need a more tactical solution, next slide please. We also have a specific, we're doing this with the universities, it's been really successful. Either they furloughed some of their team, which is very common, and they don't have the resource, or they don't have the resource in China because they had to make redundancies when they were all in lock-in. So we can remotely support your teams either here or in China. We have teams both in Shanghai and working remotely in the UK, where we can support on your promotional planning and deployment. We can create paid adverts across channels, we can create content, we can translate, we can copyright, we can provide online PR services. We still have an active team of 20 marketing professionals at Emerging Communications across copywriting, design and account management, who are still working in the UK, because we're very active in the university and B2B sectors at the moment, and in property. So if anybody just needs more tactical support, we're doing a package that will end in June, where you can just buy a block of time and deploy it as and when you need to. So something we don't normally do. We normally do things very much more in a strategic fashion, but for some of the brands we've spoken to, this is something that they desperately need right now to actually run a live streaming session or to run an online event, by way of example. We can just set that up in a matter of days, and we recently have done that with a number of brands. Next slide, please.